Paige, thank you so much for being here with me. We look forward to having you at the 7th Annual Step Up Conference that's coming up on April 28th. And so your session is inclusive leadership. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so mahalo nui, Jerry, for inviting me to become a part of this conference. Excited to present about inclusive leadership. And this presentation is geared towards leaders everywhere, anyone who's from the C-suite level to managers, anyone who's at a director level role, VP level role, because we understand that there is a demographic in the workplace, specifically with managers and people managers, where we need to move the needle. And, what do we as leaders do to kind of think about and look internally about what does it mean to be inclusive? How do we have, how do we demonstrate critical leadership skills, inclusive leadership skills? What do we bring into our practice, into our teams? Better understand how to, what is insider and outsider dynamics. So especially for those who are in corporate environments, there is a sense of insider and outsider dynamics that really take place within an organization, and not just in tech or corporations, but also in government and also nonprofits. So really excited to explore those dynamics and how do we actually create a culture of belonging at work, knowing these different dynamics. At the end of the session, we'll be creating an action plan to be ready to share your learnings with others, so then you can actually, so you can, the next day or even the next week, you'll be able to implement them. Some of the learning reminders is to be fully present, choose your level of participation, but we welcome folks to be really engaged and ready to network with each other, to create community with one another as folks who are invested in this work, and excited to learn more about, to really inspire folks and especially leaders to invest in diversity, equity, inclusion work, because we know that it is work that must be shared, especially at the level, the leadership level. And so that's the main goal of our presentation, is to how do we activate leaders and really realize what is, what is the power position and privilege that we hold as leaders, and how can we, build out inclusive workplace environments for all of us to thrive, not only just in business, but also as team members.
Yeah, it's like one thing with with leaders, they have a responsibility to the whole. And with the EDI work, diversity, equity, inclusion, however we want to lay the acronym down, I think it's everybody's responsibility to make it happen. So sometimes leaders forget how to lead. Sometimes they forget what it means to be inclusive. Are you going to be covering any of that in your session?
Yes, we'll be going through historical perspectives. We're going to be talking about mindsets and perspectives, and then we're going to talk about, what does it mean to invest, right? And then what are some of the culture and behaviors that we have? We'll kind of go over the iceberg model. But when we talk about investment into this work and what is our role as leaders and what that impact looks like, we'll really start from the foundation, and it all starts from systemic advantage and privilege. And then how do we work across difference too? That's where a lot of the work is actually critical, as well as, besides building out these foundational learnings as leaders, but also typically D&I leaders get hired on once we have some kind of a fire, right? There's some things happen, we're in a reactionary tone. So, what are some of the tips that for working across differences on our teams as well? So that's what I'll be able to cover.
That sounds awesome. It's like I talk a lot about creating pono relationships. It's like in Hawaii, pono means making things right. And I feel that with leaders, sometimes they can be held to a certain kind of standard to ensure that they're creating this pono space. Are you going to integrate any of your indigenous knowledge into the work that you're going to be bringing to Step Up?
Yeah, so I be integrating some of the native. So just a little background on myself. I'm a Native Hawaiian woman from the island of Oahu, and we will be using some of the Olelo no Eaus, or indigenous learnings, some Olelo Hawaii, which is Hawaiian, Native Hawaiian language. To kind of talk about these concepts, a little bit of it, right? So adopting a little bit of our value system as Indigenous people, because now we're as we learned through the pandemic and as we kind of go in through through a westernized lens, is that it's not working. It's not working for us. And what does it mean to kind of adopt Indigenous communal value system that's a little bit more focused on a community, on the community, right, as team members. I also will be adopting, because I am the head of diversity, equity, inclusion for Prime Video and Studios at Amazon, is that we do have these really great core leadership principles that I will be integrating as well. Because, when we're thinking about inspiring leaders for continued learning, one of our leadership principles is being curious. So always inspecting, how can we do something better? How can we be better? And how do we lead better teams? How do we lead more inclusively? And I think that be curious is such a huge leadership principle. And that's something that all leaders should be adopting, because we, like what you said, Gary, like that there's an issue about being stagnant, right? Thinking that we've gone, we are at a certain level at a in a leadership position. We've got the degrees, we got, we've achieved the highest levels of our careers, yet we are still learning, right? We're still adapting. And so that's something that I want to also include and integrate into my presentation, is that, yes, I'll be leaning into my Indigenous values and kind of ways of learning, with Indigenous lens, but also from a global tech company, right? That also is leading global teams, which is pretty astounding, right? Because diversity, equity, inclusion work globally is in whole nother beast in itself. And that's where I'd be able to kind of share my learnings on a global level too.
That's great. Yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited to see what you bring. And it's like talking about leaning into your Indigenous ways of being. It gets me excited. Chicken skin. So my last question that I have is, what is the single most important message you want to convey to your audience to help move racial equity forward?
My key message is adopted from one of my role models. Her name is Arlen Hamilton, and she is the first queer Black woman who's graced the cover of Fast Company. She is the creator of a pretty much a fund for POC-led startups. And she says, a big quote for me is, how do you become a key maker and not a gatekeeper? And that has really stuck with me as I continue to progress within my own career, but also how I talk to or consult with VPs within, my own organization, is that, sometimes leaders can be blockers, right? In this work. And so as leaders, how can we start creating keys instead of becoming gatekeepers, right? Key makers, right? Like thinking ourselves as leaders as key makers. We're the ones creating resources. We're the ones who have power, privilege, and position. So how do we create more keys for other folks and our team members that we're leading to open the doors to new opportunities, to innovation? And that to me is like the biggest key point that I want to stress in my presentation, is that we are all key makers. And then how do we make sure that this work is invested by ourselves, and then how do we look at ourselves internally to do that?
That sounds awesome. It sounds like your foundation of your work and the place in which you come is from a place of aloha. Which is really, I mean, that's what we need in DEI work, because it's so complex, right? And the conversations can be so complex. The conversations on DEI can actually activate the somatic response, causing people to fall into cognitive dissonance. And when it comes to leadership, we've got to be able to self-regulate, and so it's like when you can meet each other with grace and with compassion, and also with responsibility and accountability, I think that makes great leaders. So so with your target audience, are you looking to just target leaders or upcoming leaders as well too?
I mean, both, right? I think everyone is a leader. Doesn't matter if you have position or not. Everybody has skin in the game when it comes to leading, pretty much leading and also pushing for diversity, equity, inclusion within any of your spheres. It doesn't have to be your company, your communities, your ohanas, right? And so everybody has a role to play, whether you do have a position or not. And that is my target audience, is that anyone who is invested in this work should learn more about the work and also invest in themselves to move forward. And I think this conference is already providing that community space for us to be vulnerable, to learn, to question, to inspect, to debate, but also to collaborate, right? And what an incredible opportunity to do that online and virtually with some of the best leaders in Washington and beyond.
Yes, thank you so much. So yes, we're excited to have you, Sage, on April 28th. And your session is going to be, I think I just told you, right? It's like from 9:45 to 11:45. So a 2-hour session with you is going to be amazing. So thank you so much for joining me today. And we look forward to having you at the Step Up Conference on April 28th.
Amazing. Mahalo nui. Ahui ho.
Mahalo, ahui ho.